You know what's crazy to me? It's how often society talks about all the ways that women's bodies are shamed and how women have to face these societal standards of beauty that create these insecurities in them. What we don't talk about enough is how men are also feeling similar bodily insecurities because they are taught by, or through experience maybe, um, or sometimes just directly taught by God knows who, that their bodies need to be a certain way. Right? Maybe it's through images. Maybe it's just assumptions that they make. Maybe it's because they get teased at some point. I don't know. Usually, guys tend to make jokes about it, but I don't remember ever having any real conversation with other men about their bodily insecurities. I know they exist. I just don't know why it's never talked about. As a society, we talk about women's bodies a lot, right? Why aren't we talking about men's bodies more? All right, not to criticize, but to really unpack the insecurities created by some maybe unspoken expectations of men. So I'm going to talk about it. If you feel uncomfortable, probably because maybe you haven't talked about this stuff out in the open about your own body image issues. Well, it's time to start exploring exactly what that's about. Okay, so I'm going to be fairly blunt. Be ready to feel uncomfortable. I know many of you probably will, but the discomfort is not necessarily a bad thing. It's probably because we're not used to having these kinds of conversations. Okay, all right. There are two physical insecurities that, from my experience, again, it could differ depending on what kind of community you live in, right? But for me, there are two physical insecurities that plague a lot of men. That's their height and their penis size. Okay, maybe we could also add to this list baldness or like a receding hairline or something. I don't know. That seems to be something that a lot of men seem to be insecure about as well. I'm not sure exactly why. Maybe a sociologist can give me a breakdown of how society imposes these expectations on men through, I don't know, media or whatever else it is. Again, I'm not an expert in most things, and or maybe anything you could argue. I can tell you what I do hear myself from conversations with straight female friends. So I have some idea of where this height stuff at least comes from. Um, at least from some of these female friends, they talk about height in an ideal partner quite a bit, like a lot. It seems to be a big factor. I still can't figure out exactly what the preference is about necessarily, um, but many seem to at least explicitly claim to have this sort of preference. Right. So if you describe like an ideal man for them, they'll be like, oh, like I want them to be at least like 6 foot or yada, yada, yada. Okay. What's odd for me is that they say that this is what they want. And then I see who they date, and their description of what they say they wanted never seems to fit whoever it is that they're actually dating. So it's very confusing. And I honestly don't think that it should be too surprising that it's confusing. I don't think most people actually know what they want from a partner, from family, from life, just in general. But especially when it comes to like romantic partners, um, they say that they want a lot of things and then it doesn't go with how they behave, right? So at least when they say that they want certain features in an ideal partner, it's actually not very stable. It's not stable definitely through the years, but sometimes from like week to week seem to vary what they care more about. Um, from so maybe it depends on the mood, it depends on maybe the focus or the nature of the conversation at the time. Here's something else I also experience. I experience this from time to time talking to guys, especially in competitive settings. Guys will often sun or look down on another guy, belittle them as part of the trash talking they do in competitive arenas. And one way they often do so is height, right? So like you see this in in basketball in the NBA when one player flexes on another by saying that the other one is too small. They do this little like gesture indicating that they're too small or too short to guard them, or that it's easy to score on them. I wouldn't be surprised if kids tease each other because of height, because kids tease each other for all kinds of random traits, height, clothes, the way you chew. If it's observable, if it's something that they can see, it's open to mocking for kids. So I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of guys had this sort of experience where they were made fun of for some physical feature, and one of those happened to be their height, right? Um, But what this tells me is that guys are getting this impression that height matters from somewhere, right? They're not just imagining it. It's not just like completely in their head. They're not just making this stuff up. Okay. They're getting this notion that height matters from some place. All right. They're not just suddenly getting insecure about their height. Either they were directly made fun of for being too tall, too short. Maybe they were rejected from dates, and the reason that was given was that they're too short. Because there's a bunch of dating shows that are like this, like I've seen online, where people talk about height as a preference. Something probably happened to lead to whatever insecurity you developed about your height, right? None of this should be surprising. Like I said, it all just kind of gets it just comes with growing up in the kind of world that we grew up in. Okay. You can maybe also lump in the muscle mass thing with the height thing. Okay. So a lot of men have this impression that they need to have a decent amount of muscle mass. Not necessarily a six pack, but just muscle mass in general to be strong. Maybe for me, it was watching like a lot of WWE. Back then it was called WWF growing up. And for me, it was, I got teased for being fat. Other people have been bullied for being scrawny. Something seems to contribute to many men thinking that muscle mass somehow correlates to manliness. If you're strong, then you can protect others, fix things, do manly things with manly tools, right? Lift heavy objects, right? Adjacent is the whole desire for a six pack that does kind of come with it, but not necessarily. But I do remember, like, back when I was, I think I was in college, right? Seeing Fight Club for the first time. I saw Brad Pitt with his shirt off, and goddamn, right? Like, it's like that looks pretty damn good, right? That body, it was like, damn, right? I want to be clear about something. It's not that I don't see that these physical traits can contribute to physical attraction. So I'm not going to like knock on people for being physically attracted to whatever it is that they're physically attracted to. But I do want to note that I think a lot of times we tend to overly emphasize some of these physical traits. Physical attraction in humans, anyways, seem to be quite complex. Is definitely varied. There's no like one thing that everybody seems to be after. At least when it comes to people that you actually want to develop some kind of relationship with, right? Not like just like maybe just like have sex with, right? But like actually develop a real relationship, right? That kind of deeper level attraction is much more complex for humans and involves a lot of things that go beyond just physical traits. I think this is kind of often under discussed. I can find people attractive, but never actually think of dating them, right? I can find them physically attractive, but not think to actually date them or even be friends with them, right? Or be around them. That would depend heavily on a range of factors that besides the physical that would draw me to that person, like conversation and shared interests, shared values, worldview, experience, like shared experience of the world and so on. But to say that seeing this out there in the world doesn't impact you in any way would be a lie, right? If I were to say that, like, you look, these physical features don't make any difference, I would be lying to you, right? Like, it does make a difference. We are attracted to who we're attracted to. Some of it's shaped by our own experience. Some of it is shaped by, media telling us these are the kind of like the standards of beauty. We get them from somewhere, right? Again, it comes from somewhere, right? Depending on what you're exposed to and what you experience, you're going to have your own standard for what you find to be physically attractive. But one thing that does happen is that some of these standards in the outside world often gets internalized, and we can start seeing ourselves by these standards. And I think this is some of the ways in which this standard of beauty or physical attractiveness kind of becomes a kind of insecurity when we don't see it in ourselves. So that's with regards to like height, maybe muscle mass. I actually am not completely certain where the whole penis size things comes from exactly. I know that guys tease each other for having like a small dick. All right. But then when I researched this at some point, I think in college, I was like curious about it because like, I was like, oh, like just scientifically, like what would be the average penis size, right? I found myself, I think maybe at some point I was a little bit insecure because I wasn't sure what the average was. Maybe that was part of the reason I wanted to look it up. Because it seems like majority of people would fall within a certain range. Like there's like a standardized, like there's like a standardized like bell curve or something. Uh, let's be clear about something. When guys tease each other about penis size, it's always about length, never about girth. When I was looking this stuff up, I was always like just kind of fascinated by these sorts of conversations. It was always about length, never about girth, which actually I don't know why, right? I feel like girth is probably just as important and functionally maybe matters more. And engineering majors could tell me, right, whether or not this is true, right? I feel like I mean, I don't know enough about physics and of this and how this all works, but I feel like girth contributes to a strong, stable base. You know, I think about when I like building when I'm building like Legos, and I want to make sure that like a large Lego set doesn't topple over. Like, oh, it needs a strong, stable base. That's kind of what like that's kind of like what girth feels like to me, right? It gives it a nice, strong base. Feels like it would be super helpful for many of the penile functions that you might have. You might go ahead and use whatever it is that you use it for whatever function you need it for. That's besides the point. My point is just that if you've accepted your penis size, if your partner is perfectly happy with it, if it's functionally doing all the things it's supposed to do, right? Reason dictates like there should be no necessarily any reason to be insecure about it. Well, again, it's probably coming from somewhere why people get kind of worked up and think too hard about the whole penis size thing. Um, Maybe someone said something hurtful to you, or someone was disappointed in your bedroom performance. Like, we'll come back to this about the whole performance thing, right? But you know, something probably happened to make you feel a certain way. Maybe it snowballed into something more. You know, this kind of happens a lot with insecurities, right? It's like you get teased once and then you become super aware of it. And then so you see it, right? And you think about it a lot more than maybe other people necessarily do. And that just feeds into your insecurities, right? Um, we become more sensitive to it and aware of it. And then, you know, become to some degree like paranoid about this kind of stuff. Look, I'm not going to tell anyone ever to be insecure about any aspect of their body. Okay. What I'm trying to do is acknowledge that it obviously exists when it comes to insecurities about our bodies, right? This is not a gendered thing, right? Like men experience it too. I think just a lot of men don't necessarily talk about it. But I want to talk about it in the open because the first thing I want us to do is not be in denial about it, right? Like men need to stop pretending like they don't have these insecurities and they don't feel shame about it or whatever, right? Like, stop being in denial about it. Just acknowledge it, right? Admit it to yourself that you have them, that there might be aspects of your body that you don't necessarily like, or maybe you don't have a problem with it, but you feel like other people seem to get on your case about it or tease you for it or, you know, don't want to date you for it or I don't know, whatever else you might be thinking in your head, right? And I'm sorry if you haven't found the space to be able to acknowledge it out loud, but in the least, I hope you acknowledge it to yourself. All right, in the least. I think that's probably a good starting point because, like, once you kind of acknowledge it to yourself, it honestly becomes a lot easier to talk about it in the open. My guess is probably because you realize, like, other people probably have them too, right? But there's no point in denying it because it'll haunt you for the rest of your life if you don't. It's exhausting, honestly, to live with these insecurities, right? Trust me, it feels really good to just say it out loud, and that way you could deal with the feelings and then find a way to work through them. Here's also why I want to just acknowledge these types of insecurities. Once you're able to acknowledge them, you can actually have conversations about it. I'm talking like real conversations, right? Talk about where you get those insecurities, right? Like this is where the real like deeper conversations could happen with friends, right? You could talk about where it is that those insecurities come from. You could get a better understanding of each other if you share out loud why you feel insecure about, you know, what you feel insecure about. And, you know, friends care about each other, right? So they'll do their best not to like step on your sore spots, right? Um, but it's a chance for you to kind of have these conversations about your past experience, you know, what has hurt you. You get to really work through a lot of these feelings, both from the past and present, that center around these sorts of insecurities, right? And you gain clarity as a result. You gain clarity over your insecurities. Having insecurities is perfectly normal. Like having insecurities doesn't make you a bitch. Like I can't stress it enough. Like I don't care that men have insecurities. Okay. The fact that you're in denial of your insecurities, that's what makes you a bitch, right? Because being in denial of insecurity of your insecurities means that you're not actually dealing with it, right? And all this excessive concern over your bodily features, that's really like, for me, I just see that bitchness like leaking out of you in other ways, right? The more you try to cover it up, the more you try to obsess over these ideas, like the more you're likely to put other people down or try to build yourself up by focusing on these sort of physical traits. And the more you do that, the more I just see you as an insecure bitch, right? So maybe this should give you some comfort, I think. The next time someone engages in some body shaming, you just look at them and ask yourself, what kind of insecurities do they have that they feel a need to shame others, right? And then in your mind, you could just be thinking like, oh man, the fact that they're doing it just tells me that guy's a bitch, right? Hey guys, seriously, men come in all shapes and sizes. You're given what you're given. If you want to change the way you look, I'm not going to be mad at you, right? Look, if you are like, I am not in shape, I am out of shape, it is causing health problems, I want to get in shape, it's going to change the way I look physically, and then I feel better when I look better. I don't know, maybe you want soft skin. I don't know what the deal is, right? If you want to change the way that you look because you want to do it for yourself, I ain't going to judge you, right? You do you. Okay. I don't have a problem with that. I don't have a problem with plastic surgery in general, like just in and of itself. Right. What I want you to consider though is why you're getting it. That's what tells me whether or not you're a bitch. Right. If your decision is rooted in some insecurities about your body and you're changing your outward appearance instead of dealing with the insecurity that's within, then you're a bitch. But you're a bitch because you're all you're doing is avoiding the real issue, right? You're being a coward. You're avoiding being a grown up and dealing with your real feelings, right? And by not facing yourself in the mirror head on in this way, and instead just trying to change the physical features on the outside to try to help whatever it is that you're feeling inside without actually dealing with those feelings inside, right? Like that just makes you a bitch, right? I hate that the world left you feeling like you needed to change your body, okay? To the point that you felt the need to, like, you actually went through and changed your body, right? That's fucked up. It's not right. The world shouldn't be designed in a way where we are bringing people down in this way, right? If anything, I would hope for a society where we're lifting each other up, okay? And that we acknowledge that people just have different bodies and it is what it is, okay? I'm sorry you had to experience that. Okay. I am not going to, judge you or shame you or put you down or blame you for the way that, the world has impacted you in these ways. But the way to deal with it is honestly, like, how you deal with it matters, right? Like, look, I can't, you're right that the world could be screwed up, left you with a lot of pain and suffering, but the way you respond, that's on you. And you could deal with it by trying to change your outward appearance. Okay. Or you could deal with the actual underlying feelings. I'll tell you this much, right? From my experience, changing your body won't change the way you feel inside. That's because, again, the root issue isn't your appearance. There's nothing necessarily wrong with your appearance. What's causing you to feel the way that you do is something in you. And that's what you need to address. You need to address the way that you look at yourself, the way you feel about yourself, wherever that's coming from. It's really something internal to you. It's not necessarily your body. And I could honestly speak from my own personal experience. Like I've struggled a lot with my weight. And there were times when I weighed a lot more than I did at other times. And, you know, I realized at some point, right, like no matter how much of a quote unquote in shape I became, I think there was like a period in college and in grad school where, I was doing a pretty good job of maintaining my body in certain ways. Well, with the exception of my time in Boston, I kind of let myself go there, right? But I would play a lot of basketball. I would exercise, weight lift, do all these things. But at no point did I actually ever feel good about my body. Even if I got compliments from other people, like I never felt good about my body. I mean, that just kind of goes to show you, right? Like, look, you could change your physical appearance, but you're still going to look at yourself a certain way if you don't deal with what's internal to you, right? Which is how you view yourself. I saw myself as fat. I saw myself as out of shape. I saw myself as somebody who's not good looking. This stems from a lot of my own experience of being teased and like, that snowballing to like self image issues from back in like junior high and high school. Um, that also contributed by like feeling socially awkward a lot of the times in those years. And that self image just never went away. So it didn't matter if I actually looked differently. I still saw myself as the same kid that I saw in myself like back when I was in junior high and high school. Okay. Um, all this to say, look, your body is your body. You're given what you're given. You work with what you got to work with. Okay. Again, no judgment on you if you want to change the way you look. Okay. People do that. I mean, when I talk to people who get a lot of tattoos, it's like the same idea. It's not that they don't like hate their body or something. They don't hate their body. It's just they see the tattoos as like an art form or something like that. So like, look, if getting plastic surgery is like that, it's like, okay, I want to do this because, I feel I want to use my body as like a piece of art or something. Go for it. I don't really care. But if it's rooted in some internal stuff that you're avoiding, instead of actually dealing with it, you're just changing your physical appearance. That's a red flag for me. That just tells me that you're an insecure bitch. You need to work on your bitchness. You don't need to worry about your looks. Hope that makes sense. Okay. Adjacent to the body image issue is the body count issue. I think these are actually kind of similar as related. And I'm talking in both directions when I'm talking about body count, right? I'm talking about both keeping track of your own body count and also being concerned with other people's body counts, namely like the person you might be interested in dating. Okay, let's begin with why the fuck you're keeping track of your own body count. Let's start there, okay? Let me ask you this. Why does it matter to you how many people you slept with? Why are you even keeping track? I'll tell you some hard facts, right? People in committed relationships, at least the last time I saw studies on this, right? The people in committed relationships have way more sex than people who sleep around with different people regularly. Okay. So, in the least, body count is definitely not reflective of how much sex you have. It's also not a reflection of how experienced you are. Having sex with one person, but really taking the time to get to know that person's body and your own desires and kind of experimenting and having a deeper understanding of your own and another person's like sexuality, right? That honestly will probably give you a better experience than going around and sleeping with a bunch of different people that you don't really know very well. So, if body count is not a reflection of how much sex you have, or how much experience you have, or how knowledgeable or how quote unquote skilled you are at having sex, I don't even know if that's a real, maybe it's kind of a skill. I don't know. Then why are you thinking about your body count so much? I'll tell you what I think it is, right? Again, I'm not an expert. I don't know you. Everybody's different. But you could tell me if I'm wrong, okay? My guess is that you're concerned with body count because you're insecure about some shit. Maybe you're insecure about how attractive you are. So maybe you use body count as a way to validate, other the fact that other people might be attracted towards you, willing to have sex with you. Maybe in your mind, you think that the more people you sleep with, the more it means that people, are willing because they're willing to have sex with you. That means that they are actually attracted to you. Though I don't know, like knowing from experience, from friends and so on, like a lot of times people end up sleeping around for all kinds of reasons that have nothing to do with attraction. Again, probably stems from some sort of insecurity. Look, you're being an insecure bitch. That's what you're being. Okay. If you need to have sex to feel desired, then you need to figure out what that shit's about. You need to figure out why it is that you don't feel desired, right? Did someone shame you, or were you rejected by someone you really liked and now this is your way of coping? Like by having sex with as many partners as you can, do you feel like now you're like objectively attractive or desirable in some ways? Um, maybe this is some competitive thing. You feel jealous of someone else who seems to have, all these potential partners. Okay, like all these scream to me that you're an insecure bitch, right? Deal with the core issue, right? Deal with your jealousy, deal with your insecurity about, how attractive you are, because clearly you're insecure about something. Like that's what it sounds like. That's what it looks like to me. It doesn't seem like your keeping count of your own count has anything to do with anything that is in any way meaningful. By the way, this also, goes in the other direction, right? With men who feel pride for having a low body count. I've actually seen this as well, right? There's like men who feel, some sort of pride that they haven't slept around with a bunch of people. Okay. But it's honestly, for me, it's the same thing, right? Like, why are you taking pride in it? Like, why? Right? Is it because you want to take some moral high ground, you arrogant bitch, right? Or is it because you're actually insecure about your body count, so you want to diminish the significance of other people, having a higher body count? Oh, I mean, which is it? Either way, you're being a bitch, right? Either way, this is really not about the body count stuff. The body count really is just a signal for me that there's something else going on in you, right? Like there's something that you're trying to compensate for, or there's something else that you're trying to make yourself feel better about yourself with regards to this whole body count thing, right? Like, look, what I'm pointing out is this, right? When you keep track of your own body count, right? It feels like it's not really the body count that matters. It seems like, for me, it's an indication that there's something else going on in you, right? I think it'll help to ask yourself why you're so concerned about it. I honestly don't think it matters at all, personally. Everyone has a relationship history of some kind. It might not be like some deep committed relationship. Maybe it's just people that you've had a crush on, unrequited love, like your first relationship, um, the relationship that helped you learn a lot about yourself. It could be like a friendship that never blossomed, but it was super meaningful. The ups and downs, the moments of uncontrolled passion or pain, right? These are all part of the journey of learning how to be in a romantic relationship, all part of learning about you in the context of a relationship, or maybe it was just a moment of physical attraction that just took you over in that moment. But all these moments, these experiences, they're all ones that give you insight into what you are really like, what you enjoy, what you don't, what's a good fit for you, what's not a good fit for you. We learn from these relationships. We should ideally grow from them, but everyone needs to go through them, right? Like there's no way to learn without actually having gone through it, right? And so for everyone, the journey looks different. The journey is what it is. And, you're going to learn something different from it depending on your own experience, right? But that's what matters, right? It's the journey, right? When you start keeping track of body count, you're not focusing on the journey because you're using the number for something, right? The number is like a stand in for something like validation or something else, right? The number itself honestly shouldn't matter if you're focusing on the ways that you've learned from your experience with the people that you've encountered and had these relationships with along the way. So I'll ask you again, like, why do you care about your body count? Why does it actually matter to you? And I think once you start asking that question of yourself, you'll start to realize, like, yeah, like the body count, you know, why was I keeping track of it? Like, what was this all about, right? When you start asking these questions, you start digging into exactly what's going on underneath the surface. And that's really what you need to deal with if you don't want to be a bitch, right? Now let's shift your concern. Let's shift our concern to your concern with other people's body count, right? So this is when people are thinking about their partner or their potential partner's body count. They want to know how many people they've slept with in the past. Okay, let me ask you, why do you want to know their body count? What the fuck is that about? Now, I get that you might be curious about your potential partner's body count, but again, why are you concerned about it? Why are you curious about it? Why do you want to know so bad? Now, I guess if you're concerned about STDs, and I'm a big proponent of people talking openly about their sexual past. I used to not be that way because, I come from a shame culture. This is something you don't talk about. But I think the more that I think about it, like from a rationally, I think like, oh, it kind of helps to know to some degree for the sake of like being concerned with like STDs, medical reasons. Um, it may be something that you have a legit concern over, but even here, you don't need to know body count. Like that's not what you need. Like what you really want to know is whether or not they are, they have an STD or not. whether or not you need to be careful about, how it is that you and what kind of sexual activity you engage in, right? Whether or not they were tested recently, right? Whether they should be tested recently just to be on the safe side, right? That's what matters. The body count doesn't matter. Like the body count is like a stand-in. You're using it as some sort of metric to figure out whether or not, you know, they might potentially have an STD, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they have or don't have an STD, right? So go to the thing that actually matters then. If you're concerned about like, STDs, then just find out about STDs. Not a big deal. Maybe you're concerned with something else. Maybe you're concerned with whether or not your partner has had a lot of experience because maybe you value people who don't go sleeping around with a bunch of people. Like some people have this sort of value, right? Where it's like sex is a reflection, should be a reflection, maybe that's part of their value. That should be a reflection of some deeper feelings. It shouldn't be just some physical act, right? And fair enough. Like you have those values, and maybe you want to find somebody who shares those values, right? It's maybe connected with other values that you hold about loyalty, consistency, whether or not they genuinely invest in relationships or whether they just, are about the physical attraction in the moment and then they move on. Like maybe those are things that you're concerned with and you are somebody who's looking to invest time, energy into a real relationship. And so you care about the body count because you want to make sure that, when it comes to the physical, connection, it's a reflection of something deeper. Maybe, I don't know. This is one possibility. But then let's be honest, right? The body count really isn't the best metric for identifying these shared values. You know what is a way to identify these shared values is to actually have conversations with them, right? But I'm asking in earnest, right? Like, does body count really matter for determining whether or not you have these shared values? Look, because here's some possibilities, right? Here's one possibility, right? A person might have what you consider to be a high body count because maybe they didn't know themselves in the past. They made mistakes in the past. They didn't understand their own values or what they cared about. And, at some point they did some reflection. They began to understand what they're about, what kind of values they wanted to commit themselves to. People all, like I said, people all learn from their experience, right? A lot of times, like, we don't know ourselves very well, and we need to go through it before we could, you know, really understand what it is that we truly care about, right? So maybe this person learned from the past, and then now they hold the same value as you, right? But maybe they had to go through some experience in order to get to that point, okay? Now, let me ask you this. What matters to you? If what matters to you is that they share these same values as you, right? Then, maybe their most recent experience might be a good indication. People's behaviors can be an indication of past behavior, can be an indication of future behavior. But, I say this with students all the time, right? Like, look, the first paper you wrote in the class might not be your greatest work, but then you might have shown vast improvement over the years. That shows me that you've learned a lot, right? From your initial work to your last work, right? So it's all part of the process. Maybe they've come to hold the same values as you. Then their body count won't necessarily be a good indicator of whether or not they hold shared values, right? You might want to look at just their more recent history and ignore some of their older history. I don't know. Another possibility is that you have no idea, you know, why their body count is what it is and whether or not it aligns with your stated values. Like, look, it is possible that we just made a mistake. Like, people make this kind of mistake all the time where they trust somebody, they believe that it's, the relationship that they're building is something more meaningful, something more committed, only to find out the other person doesn't feel that way about, you. And so you you know, might have a high body count, but that's not because you don't share the same value. You just didn't pick out the right people, right? Like, these people maybe didn't know themselves that they were partnered up with. Like, maybe they didn't know themselves, or maybe they were lying to them, or whatever else it might be, right? All I'm saying is this: if your goal is to find someone with similar values, body count is not necessarily going to be the best metric. You know what is? Getting to actually know the person, right? Like having real conversations with them and, talking about your values and then seeing behavior, I think is probably one of the best indicators, right? So seeing how they live out those values in their day-to-day life, in, their relationship with friends and family and, all these other places, right? I personally trust what people do, not what they say. So I'd probably lean more heavily on what they do on a day-to-day basis, and you can see at least to some degree some consistency if they are living out those values in a lot of different places in their lives, and they're doing it on a day-to-day basis, right? But you won't know that until you spend time with them, until you actually get to know them, right? They could lie through their teeth all they want, but their day-to-day behavior is going to be probably a good reflection of who they truly are inside. You'll need to see it for yourself. How do you do that? You date the person, you spend time with them, you take these chances, right? See how they are in different settings, introduce them to people that are close to you so that you get a sense of how they are with the people that matter to you. I don't know, like try all these different things out, right? There's no way to really truly know a person, but the closest you can get is to spend real meaningful time with them. Asking them about their body count won't give you that kind of insight. All it's going to do is give you a number that you then take as a proxy for something, and then you just run to some, whatever conclusion you do with that number. Okay. Listen up. My guess is honestly that whatever excuse you make for why you care about body count, the real reason probably has something to do with your own insecurities or trauma or something else, something in your past, right? The past, everyone has a past, right? Like the past matters insofar as it gives you insight into who you are, who the other person is. If you actually care about just getting to know the person in front of you, then the person's body count is a small, I think to some degree, fairly insignificant piece of data. What probably matters more is just learning about their history, like just all of it, right? Getting to really know them, learning about the experience that they've had and how it's shaped them, seeing how that impacts the way that they go through life today. Past behavior, like I said, can be a good predictor of future behavior, but only when a person never learns from their past, right? Like, look, if they've grown from their past, their future behavior should change as well. If they haven't learned from their past, they're going to just engage in the same sort of behavior, right? So what matters more isn't their past behavior, isn't their body count necessarily. It's whether or not they've grown and learned from it and became the kind of person that you actually want to be with, right? That's really what would carry that sort of weight in figuring out whether or not this person is actually right for you. I personally would be less concerned about body count and more concerned about whether or not a person takes time to reflect on their experience. That for me is probably a bigger indicator. Like if they're the kind of person to slow down, reflect on their life, really kind of look in the mirror, do a lot of self work, that gives me assurance that at least they're willing to go to these places, the difficult place, to make some real changes in their life, right? When a person lacks that sort of self reflection, that tells me that they're inclined to make the same mistakes they did in the past. And in that case, their past behavior is going to definitely be a red flag, because not because they've had those experiences in the past, but rather because they never learned anything from it. Right? That would be my concern. So let me ask you, like, what exactly is your concern? Right? And specifically, when it comes to body count, why are you concerned with the body count? And I think it's the same deal, right? As with your body image concerns, right? Whatever it is, whatever it is that you say you're concerned with, my guess is that if you don't have a clear sense of some of the internal things that are going on, whether it's insecurities or past pain and trauma that you never worked through, like whatever it is that's leading you to be concerned about body count, the fact that you're not dealing with the core issue and instead focusing on the body count and then saying that that matters a lot because of whatever XYZ reasons, it honestly just sounds like a bunch of excuses for not dealing with your own shit. And what have I been saying this whole time? The fact that you're not willing to go there to deal with your shit, that's what makes you a bitch. Right? And I believe you're better than that. I believe you're better than that. All it takes is, again, to ask those questions like, why are you actually so concerned about these things? And to really dig deep in trying to answer to get to the bottom of it. And that means that you're going to have to trudge up some painful experience from the past, or, you know, views that you have of yourself that are, it's not pleasant to have those thoughts or feelings, but you're going to have to deal with it, right? And the longer you don't deal with it, the more of a bitch you stay being, right? Like, so stop being a bitch. Make a genuine effort to find out why you care about body count, why you care about penis size, why you care so much about whether or not you're bald. Like, figure out why this matters to you so much. And I think when you do that, you'll get to the heart of where this is all coming from. And that'll be the first step in becoming less of a bitch. I know you can do it. It's hard, but I know you can do it. So, if anything, maybe start today, yeah?